Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Steven Brown, and in today's video, guys, the Leafs haven't really done anything exciting, and this channel normally is about the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I am a journalism student, so I do believe that I can look at things objectively, and we're going to go over and analyze and react to all of the major NHL trades that were made today, and there will be time codes in the description, so if you're looking for a specific trade, you can just skip to that part and watch the analysis and reaction to that trade. So first up, in its most recent one, it is the major trade made between the Vancouver Canucks and the Arizona Coyotes. Starting off with the Vancouver Canucks side of things here, Connor Garland is a awesome restricted free agent at just 25 years old. He was a player that I really wanted the Maple Leafs to go after, but it looks like the Coyotes were only interested in dealing him in packages that involved Oliver Ekman-Larsson and his contract. He is a smaller forward, but it's not like he's played in a really sheltered role, either having played against other teams' better players last season with the Coyotes, and he's produced very well at 5-on-5. I have no doubt in my mind that he's going to be capable of stepping into the Vancouver Canucks' top 6 next season and being extremely effective for them. The one thing, if you're a Vancouver Canucks fan, that you need to keep in mind with is he is 25 years of age, so that means that he has 2 more years of being an RFA and 2 more years until he hits unrestricted free agency. So being a restricted free agent, if you're looking at a possible contract extension for this player on a 2-year deal, he'd come really cheap because he's going to be an RFA for those 2 seasons. He does have arbitration rights right now as well. So he could go to arbitration and sign a longer term deal next season if you really wanted to keep him a little bit cheaper this year. But if you're offering him anything longer than a 2-year deal, a 4-year deal, now you're buying UFA years, and that's where things tend to get a little bit more expensive. I think a 3 or a 4-year deal for this player really makes sense. And if you're looking at a contract comparable, what about Tyler Toffoli's? My mind already being on the Canucks, Toffoli just popped into my mind as the first kind of comparable for a scoring winger that just signed a multi-year deal. 4 years, $4.25 million. I think that's pretty reasonable for both sides. Could be off there, but remember, when you're buying UFA years, that's when it starts to get more expensive. Oliver Ekman-Larsson, yes, the Coyotes are retaining just a shade under $1 million for the remainder of his contract, but he's legitimately been one of the worst defensemen in the NHL over the last 3 seasons. And yes, maybe in a different role on a different team, maybe Oliver Ekman-Larsson bounces back a little bit. The Coyotes aren't exactly the most exciting team to play for or necessarily the best. But for the amount of money that he's making and for the number of years he's going to be signed to this deal until he's 36, the amount that he would need to improve by, the amount that I'm willing to believe playing in a different role on a new team that he could conceivably improve by, I don't buy it. Yes, I understand that the players that were sent the other way to Arizona aren't necessarily any better, and they make a lot of money too, but all those players only had 1 more year left on their deals. The Canucks really wouldn't have saved any money by buying out any of these players, but what they could have done is they could have just placed them all on waivers and buried them in the minors. All the deals would have expired at the end of this season. They wouldn't have had to have given up the 9th overall pick, and they wouldn't be stuck with this eyesore of a contract on their books. And yes, I know I'm a Leafs fan, but we're not talking about the Leafs right now. We can separate those 2 things. Yes, I know they're bad, they're miserable, but that doesn't make this any less worse. Connor Garland is really good, but you give up all those bad contracts for one that is essentially 6 years longer, and you give up the 9th, you give up the 2nd, and the 7th. There are definitely pros and there are definitely cons, but I just wonder what else the Vancouver Canucks could have done with that 9th overall pick and that 2nd from next season instead of this. Maybe if they were just a little bit more creative or took advantage of other players that were on the market. About a week or so ago, they were a middling team without very many draft picks and a lot of expensive pieces on their roster that they either couldn't afford to pay or that they did not want to pay. And now they got a lot of draft picks and they're working with a $65 million internal budget for this upcoming season. I think they've done a lot with that $65 million budget. I don't think that there was really any hopes of them being competitive for this upcoming season, so they are doing a really good job rebuilding here. But again, it is easier to give credit to the rebuilding teams on moves because those moves are simpler. When you start actually having good players on your roster and you try to work around, their own individual circumstances and needing to pay them and needing to do this, that, and the other thing, it does become a little bit more difficult. So I can appreciate the Vancouver Canucks side of things a little bit more. But at the same time, I wonder what else they could have done with the assets that they gave up in this deal. Next up being here, the trade between the St. Louis Blues and the New York Rangers. Sammy Blais and a second-round pick going to the Rangers in exchange for Pavel Buchevich's signing rights. Buchevich will be a UFA at the end of next season, and he's coming off of a 2-year deal that saw him being paid $3.5 million. Maybe the Rangers tried to offer him a contract extension this summer, and they were just so far apart on the initial negotiations that they just looked to get something for him rather than losing him at the end of next season. But this is a really good player. A top 6, maybe even a top line forward in the prime of his career right now, is able to play on your penalty kill, and all of his other underlying numbers look pretty good. Good work by the St. Louis Blues. Sammy Blais, I mean, he's got 1 year left at $1.5 million, and then he will be an RFA at the end of that deal. He is a little bit of a bigger player at 6'2", 205 pounds, and I know that the Rangers didn't necessarily like the way that they were getting pushed around last season, especially towards the end of the year with that the whole Tom Wilson or Artemi Panarin thing. He does throw a lot of hits, but he's a bottom 6 player. He still is young enough that he could maybe develop into a middle 6 player, but I definitely don't see him having as good of a ceiling as a guy like Pavel Buchnevich. And if you're a Rangers fan and you're looking at that second round pick, well, if the Blues do decide to move on from a Vladimir Tarasenko and the rest of their roster is kind of ailing a bit, you know, maybe that's like a middle of the second round pick next season, somewhere between number 40 and number 50. And if you're a Rangers fan, you're probably a little bit underwhelmed with the return there. But the thing is, with RFAs that don't have contracts, especially with what Josh Anderson and his agent did to the Montreal Canadiens last season, I don't think teams want to put themselves in a situation like that again. Where the player and the agent said, we're only signing a 1-year deal or a 7-year deal. And the 1-year deal walks my client right to unrestricted free agency. And you don't want to just lose out on all the assets that you just spent in a trade on this player. So, of course, you're going to sign the 7-year deal. It doesn't necessarily matter how good or how bad the player is. It's just the optics of that situation. You just don't want to be in that situation. So being an unsigned RFA really does hold back players' trade values. But the Rangers are a team with money and cap space and assets, so who knows what they do next. Flyers fans, I'm sorry, but this makes no sense at all. I really like the Ryan Ellis move for your team, not just a couple of days ago, but Rasmus Ristolainen, the book's out on him. And while Risto does make a lot of money, it is just for one more season. But I thought everyone already knew about this player. I am more so willing to believe that Ristolainen leaving the Sabres can improve to a point to where he becomes useful enough to where it's not the worst trade. But again, the 13th overall pick is not nothing. I'm more so willing to believe that than I am Oliver Ekman-Larsson improving to a point which is at least acceptable or okay going from the Coyotes to the Canucks. Sorry, it was pick 14. I said pick 13 in the previous clip. But you have to wonder, they gave up Shane Gostisbehere the other day to the Coyotes for nothing. In fact, they paid the Coyotes to take him away. I don't know the internal workings of the situation there, but both players are offensive defensemen. And even though Gostisbehere's numbers have dipped the last couple of seasons, you have to wonder maybe they just would have been better off just holding on to Gostisbehere and keeping all their picks. I mean, having watched a lot of Toronto Buffalo games, Ristolainen is a bigger guy. He will throw hits. He will get involved in some antics. But he's not very good. On the power play, he's got a pretty good shot, but you already have Ivan Provorov. You already have Ryan Ellis. And at 5-on-5, I know if you're not a fan of advanced analytics, you're not a fan of them. But if literally every single one of them is saying that this guy isn't good, they can't all be wrong. You know, if you're just looking at one of them, I can see how it's easy to cherry pick, but when you're looking at all of them, they all can't be wrong. But again, for a team like the Sabres who are rebuilding, it's really easy to just not read too much into their moves. Ristolainen is a UFA at the end of next season. The team is rebuilding. They're just going in different directions. They got back the 14th overall pick for him. It's a lot harder to try to win than it is to rebuild, and the Flyers are a middle-aged team with good pieces, but expensive pieces. And at the same time, I just, like with the Vancouver Canucks, I just wonder what else they could have done with the 14th overall pick. But it doesn't stop there. The Chicago Blackhawks are acquiring Seth Jones, the 32nd overall pick in this year's draft, and a 2022 6th-round pick for Adam Boqvist, the 12th overall pick in this year's draft, a 2022 first round pick, and a 2021 second round pick. And then they are immediately extending Seth Jones on an 8-year deal for $9.5 million a season. NHL GMs heard you about the draft being boring, and they said, this year, man, we're fixing it. Adam Buchevich, a 20-year-old defenseman who had strong underlying numbers for the Blackhawks last season. I believe he shoots right-handed as well. They picked him 5th overall a couple of years ago. 16 points in 35 games for them. Really trending upwards. He's 26, turning 27 in October. And Jones is a really weird player where a lot of people who believe in advanced analytics are saying that he's not really good anymore. And people who believe in the eye test are saying, what are you talking about? This is a guy who's been really good in the past. And I think it's fair to say that there's a middle ground between the two and say that he's had a couple of down seasons. And I think that is reflected in the analytics. They're trending a little bit down from where they were when he was maybe 23 or 24 years old. He does play a lot of ice time against other teams as top-end players, but at the same time, I think that this trending down thing is real with Seth Jones. And $9.5 million at 8 seasons is insane for this player. It's like, okay, I'm willing to believe that he's not as bad as a lot of people are making him out to be, but he is trending down, right? You gotta wait for the guy to maybe show that, yeah, those seasons were just bad and, I'm having a better year this year. He did play for the Columbus Blue Jackets, and the Blue Jackets are a defensive first team, and I do think that he has a little bit more offensive capabilities to give, maybe on a team like the Blackhawks. So moving from the Blue Jackets, who also had Torts for a very, very long time, it is conceivable that this player could improve. He is young enough, right? He's not like he's exiting the prime of his career. He's still in the prime of his career. He could improve going from one team in one situation to another. That being said, Dougie Hamilton is a UFA this season, and he is literally right there and has been one of the best defensemen in the NHL over the last 3 seasons. You could convince me that Jones is still a good player and he can still play against other teams as top-end players, maybe in a different role, in a different system. He does improve. I'm willing to believe that, but I don't think that Buchevich is a guy that you give up in this trade. Ideally, you want both of those guys on your team. But with the amount of money that they're giving Seth Jones, there's not really a lot of room for him to outperform the contract at all. He just needs to be one of the best defensemen in the NHL. When you're talking about giving a player that much money and also giving up a lot of assets for them, maybe it makes more sense to throw that money at a UFA who's just as good and you can hold on to all of your assets. Or vice versa, right? You shill out all those assets, but the player that you're getting back is on a very, very value contract, so that allows you to go out and make other moves. And again, if you're looking at the last 3 seasons, you can see the downward trend in Seth Jones' game. But again, I'm willing to believe that he's closer to this 2018-2019 mark than he is the last 2 years. Torts does have a tendency of wearing players down, but Dougie Hamilton the last 3 years in Carolina has been so good. Again, it's not really a matter of me thinking that the trade is good or bad. I think it's a theme with a lot of these trades that we've talked about in this video. It's just, I wonder what else the teams could have done with those assets and with that money. I have no idea how long this video is at this point, and we've talked about a lot of things here. If there's more stuff that happens, I'll just make another video at this point. I do predominantly talk about the Leafs here on this channel. I am a Leafs fan, but also a journalism student, so I think I can admit that the Leafs are not necessarily the most exciting right now, and when they're not very exciting, I don't see why I can't talk about the rest of the league and things that are going on. So make sure to like the video if you did like, and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. And guys, remember, whether you're a Leafs fan or a new fan that just enjoys the struggles of the Toronto Maple Leafs, I'm going to be here to talk about all that.